In this lesson, we're now going to take a look at the elements of expressing with the eyes. And we're going to focus on focus, dilation, as well as eyelid coverage. We're going to start with focus. Now, we've already talked a little bit about focus, but focus itself also has a usefulness when we're discussing creating expressions with the eyes. Now, as has been mentioned, we typically don't want to draw the pupils looking directly out at the viewer. This really makes the character have a blank or a dead type of stare. However, when we're talking about this blank stare in terms of expression, it can be useful. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, something that we do want to do is typically we want to make sure that we have a slight amount of squinting happening in the pupils so that they're slightly moved inwards, right, on inwards of the iris itself. And this creates the impression that the character is looking at something. They're not blank staring. So keep this in mind as you move forward, creating your eye expressions. Let's take a look at the levels of dilation now. And starting off, the pupil itself can really be expanded really widely when the character is looking at something they love, something they like, or they're looking at very, very bright lights. And in a real human eye, our pupils expand when there is very little light in order to let more light in, and they contract or dilate when there is very little light. Conversely, we can make the pupils very, very small. And this is good when you're having your character express a very surprised feeling, or they're under the influence of some kind of chemicals, or they're under shock, or they've been taken over by some evil force or something like that. You can dilate their pupils as a way to express this with their eyes. So there's a lot of uses for expanding and dilating the pupils. So do keep that in mind. Next, let's take a look at eyelid coverage. And effectively, when we're wanting to combine all the facial expressions together, the eyes are the main focal point. And we can do a few things with the eyes, taking into account dilation, taking into account focus, and lastly, taking into account the coverage of the eyelid over the iris and the pupil. And in this instance, number one here, we have a typical neutral style eye where we have most of the roundness of the iris being seen, and we can see the full pupil. And then number two, another example of a typical neutral eye coverage where we have a partial coverage of the entire iris, which is also very common. Either of these are both of your types of neutral looks. But then when we move to shocked or amazed types of expressions, whether the pupil is dilated or expanded, we want to ensure that we are keeping space between the upper eyelid and the lower eyelid if you've drawn one in. And this is a typical characteristic of the shocked or very wide open eyes, that there is space running all the way around the iris. So let's call this shocked for now, or really open, right? Very, very open eyes. And then in our example number 4, we have the half closed or the partially closed eye. And in this instance, we can use this for indicating tiredness in the character, or anger, certain types of anger or intensity, or also those sort of come to bed eyes, as they say, those lusty eyes, those look at me eyes. So that's what we can do by partially covering the iris itself, and also ensuring that we're also covering a large majority of the pupil. So do keep that in mind. You do want to cover the pupil when you're doing the closed partially lid closure for those expressions. And then an eye expression number 5, we have the normal closed eye. And its typical characteristic really is that it curves downwards. And that's just when the character's eyes are closed, or they're praying, or they are sleeping. And then conversely, number 6, we have the eye-shaped design where the curve is the opposite way around. And in this instance, it's one of those heartfelt eyes being closed when the character's smiling, or they're really experiencing joy and they close their eyes and they look to the sky. And in a nutshell, these 6 states of eye closure help us to manipulate and expand on the character's emotions. We combine these states of eyelid closure with the pupil dilation, with the focus, in addition to the eyebrow movements and the mouth, to create literally innumerable facial expressions for our characters. That is the end of the lesson, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.